Start.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our British Council webinar on skills programming through a gender lens in a post-COVID-19 world. My name is Linda McCourt and I work in the UK Skills team. The webinar is being recorded and we will send out the recording to everyone who has joined today. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions and the Q&A can be found on the right-hand side of your screen. So please do ask questions as we go along. We'll also have some time for a bigger Q&A at the end of the presentation. So the skills team's work within Technical and Vocational Education and Training, TVET, aims to improve technical and vocational skills systems so that they're inclusive and relevant for employment and entrepreneurship. Gender issues impact on all the contexts in which we work. Fewer women participate in the labour market than men. They're more likely to be unemployed, have higher risk of vulnerable employment, and are less represented in higher paid and senior roles. These issues are both reflected in and impacted by gender biases in TVET systems. These affect the education and training activities of women, men, girls and boys, and shape their choices and future opportunities. So I'm very pleased to welcome you to this webinar today and to have a very esteemed panel of speakers with us to discuss these important issues and to discuss the British Council research findings. Yvonne Prendergast, an independent consultant in gender issues who carried out the research on behalf of the British Council, which we're presenting today. And we have some case studies from Graham Clark from West Lothian College in Scotland and Mahbub Rahman from Palladium Group in Bangladesh. I'd like to hand over first to Yvonne Prendergast, who will be talking us through what we mean by a gender lens, gender equality, and walking us through the Gender and Skills Programming Toolkit, which can be found in the research report. So over to you, Yvonne. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. It's my pleasure to be with you to share some insights from the study. It's a very practical study, as it said, and it was based on in-depth conversations that I had with more than 30 skills practitioners across the globe, and also in-depth desk research where I was exploring a whole range of different skills programs and looking for those that were both effective at delivering gender equality and those that were facing challenges and looking at how they have dealt with those. So in the report itself, there's 11 detailed case studies, and as Linda said, it ends with 3 detailed tools on how to deliver gender equality in practice through our programming. The next slide shows just briefly what I'll be covering in this session, a quick reminder on why it's imperative to think about gender equality, what we mean by a gender lens, and then the important bit of it, how do we do it? And to put it plainly, the next slide spells out why we need to focus on gender, and it's because women and men live very different economic and social lives. Linda began to touch on some of these, which is that women in almost every country in the world, whatever the different contexts, still are much more less likely to participate in the workforce. They'll be in more vulnerable employment. And as well as these economic factors, other social factors completely shape the extent to which they can engage in skills development and benefit from it. So we know that women still bear the brunt of unpaid care work and domestic work in the home. And at this terrible time of a pandemic, this is becoming extremely visible across the world, the extent to which all of our economies are based on women's invisible and unpaid care work. Other things such as sexual violence, sexual harassment, not only bear a huge human toll for women, but also impact on the extent to which they can engage and benefit from skills programs. So it's because this is the backdrop against which we develop our skills programs, it's vital to consider these. Sometimes I talk to skills practitioners who explain that they have high quality programs and that they're open to everybody. However, as the next slide shows, this sort of approach, which is a gender blind approach, to my mind, what it is, by not considering what the gender differences are, it means we don't have an understanding of how they impact on the programs that we're delivering and then how they affect men and women. And so simply not considering them doesn't make these differences go away. And so while skills programmes, as the next slide states, have a huge potential to promote gender equality, it's by no means not automatic, unless we consciously think about what the barriers are for women, both in terms of accessing programmes. So, for example, physically, can they travel there? Are they allowed to engage in courses that are deemed non-traditional? When they get there, is the environment conducive? Is it a positive environment? And are they being supported to transition onto high quality employment? Unless we think about those things, those barriers, and address them in our programming, programmes are unlikely to deliver great outcomes for women. So moving on to the next slide, this is what we mean by a gender lens. It's simply making gender visible throughout a programme. And I really understand it for myself in terms of putting gender into the bones of a programme. So making sure that at every stage of a programme, we're considering gender and we're capacity building our staff and our partners so that every one of them understands they have a responsibility to promote gender and is able to do so. So on to the next slide, please. I'll just outline, these are the 3 tools that I've developed based on the examples in the research and on the learning from those in-depth discussions with lots of you here. So thank you so much for that. The first tool is how to conduct gender analysis. More about that in a moment. Second, there's a detailed checklist that does run through how we can integrate gender considerations at every stage, from design, planning, implementation through to evaluation, and then some top tips at the end. So let's remind ourselves first, what is gender analysis? Spelt out in the next slide. And this is simply a structured approach to identifying the specific experiences, the needs, the challenges, the opportunities facing women and men. Let's move on to the next slide, actually, which tells us how to do that. It's a guide to do this. What I'd say first, actually, is that this doesn't necessarily have to be a huge amount of work. You can scale it to the size of your programme, use your partners, use existing data. It may well identify data gaps, which you then may design into what your programme will do. But let's look at how we do it. The way I've developed the tool, there's areas of analysis down the left-hand side, you can see. Then I've got lots of guiding questions that I've spelt out to help us how to address these issues and then identify stakeholders. But let's breathe some life into this by some examples from the research. So start off the first one, laws, policies and regulations. So some of the guiding questions are things like, is there legislation that affects women's participation in the labour force? Are there policies that promote gender equality in TVET, technical and vocational education and training? And for example, we know that in more than 100 countries in the world, there are laws that limit, that restrict the sorts of work that women can do. More positively, in terms of policies, we know that countries do have gender equality policies, excuse me, relating to TVET. Places like Iraq, Cambodia, Bangladesh. The Bangladesh gender equality TVET policy includes targets for women in courses and as tutors, and very helpfully also sets out the kinds of factors to consider in order to create a good women-friendly training environment. Some of the questions that are in there to do with cultural norms and beliefs, questions that ask us to consider what are the norms that will shape the sorts of work that women and men can do? What are the norms about mobility, about women travelling? Some examples in terms of sorts of work women do. We know that in terms of the sectors, less than 10%, almost any in the world, of science, technology, engineering jobs are done by women. There's a less positive example from Cambodia of an extremely successful woman. She was the best graduate from an electrics course, but she had to close her electrics business because local people simply didn't believe a woman could repair radios. I know that Graham, who's going to talk shortly, has got some much more positive examples where they did engage with employers early on because they knew that these cultural norms were going to shape women's experiences. Also in Laos, a very positive example where in order to challenge those gender norms, they were doing courses like furniture making in a very rural community. They actually placed tutors to stay with families in homestay situations. This worked out really well. It was very effective, both at raising awareness of the benefits of going to training college. It also was very effective at challenging norms about women doing furniture making and construction courses, and were successful at getting women onto those courses. Gender roles links closely to gender norms. Questions like, how much time do women and men spend doing domestic care work, collecting fuel, collecting water? And how will you bear that in mind when you're planning your course? A case study from Morocco did lots of work on this. They identified it as a key feature, and in terms of the design, they did a lot of work in advance with husbands, families of the trainees who were very vulnerable young women in this programme, and designed the programme based on that, did training with the men and also addressed childcare issues and timing issues of the courses so that women could attend. Another one in terms of gender roles, it's interesting, often it's thought that this whole area doesn't benefit men. It does in many respects. One example from the Americas, research shows that gender roles in terms of how the notion of masculinity and femininity is understood can impact on young men's achievement. So, for example, in school, the whole notion of attending school, being studious, being quiet, attending to your work was kind of seen as unmasculine, with a big impact on boys' under engagement and under achievement in the schools. I'll skip to the bottom one. A quick example about patterns of power. So one of the questions is, who makes decisions about who can access skills development? A great example from Belarus, a social enterprise program, actually, business program, and it had identified in the analysis that local men, and particularly high profile men, had huge influence in this. And so this program involved training men in terms of things like responsible fatherhood, but also wider gender equality, and did a very successful social media campaign using high profile men. And the results showed a doubling of women's participation in business courses. Let's move on to tool number 2, which is looking at, there's just a moment to pause there. It's how we integrate gender considerations at every stage of a programme. We're a bit slow getting the slide, but I'll just carry on talking through it and hopefully the presentation will catch up with us. So this is about integrating gender through every stage of a programme, from design through to evaluation. I've highlighted here the golden thread. To me, this is key. What I mean by it is that I've sometimes seen great work done on gender analysis. The issues have been identified. They've sometimes been included in designing the programme. However, it might be that a certain worker leaves, that pressures are on to deliver targets, and somehow gender kind of gets forgotten throughout the delivery and also particularly the evaluation. So this is just a really detailed guide to make sure that we build it in at every stage. Rather than go through the details of this, I'll just pick 3 examples from the study from different places which highlight places who were doing this very well. First example was of a tech program, a coding program actually across Latin America. It was a very successful, they train thousands of women and they get 80% of them into tech jobs. The things that they designed into their program, early on engagement with employers, now employers pay them to access their trainees. They also did a lot of work engaging families of the women because this was a highly intensive course, so they needed to know that they would have support and wouldn't drop out. That was built in. Also from the gender analysis, they knew there was a need for a broader range of skills. 30% of this programme is things like employability skills, confidence building, life skills. Monitoring and evaluation on this is really interesting. They pay an independent company to do it. They do a lot of detailed tracking to follow women up to follow up what additional skills they need and also what demands there are in the workplace. Example number 2, a very different programme from Uganda, which is a programme helping young, very vulnerable women transition from school into employment. These young women have a high dropout rate from school, they have a high early pregnancy rate. And so this programme that was put together, a really fun programme actually, delivered by young women, mentors actually, a mix again of games, training, vocational skills, social skills, and information on health and sexual reproduction matters. Again, very successful. The outcome was they saw an increase, I think it was more than, income generation was increased by more than 70%. Importantly, things such as early marriage also decreased more than 50%. So a great blended programme there. A last example from Colombia. This is an ecotourism programme, another great one. And in terms of their design, they spent a lot of time in the design stage engaging with women's organisations. They did it to identify the women's needs, but to gain trust from the women who they wanted to get onto the programme. And I identified this as one of the key success factors actually when I spoke to them. In terms of the implementation, based on the gender analysis, what they delivered was a programme that was using community radio and also some face-to-face work. Again, skills in terms of tourism, bird watching, but also language skills and gender equality in the programme. And again, good monitoring mechanisms. I'll move on to the last slide. I'm mindful of my time and leaving room for my colleagues. So the last one is a top tips. And this tool is more, you can step back and use it at any stage of a programme. It gives examples of good practice. It also gives ideas when we're facing challenges, how to respond. I'll just pick out a few of these that I've not touched on so far. The first one is a key one, demonstrating to whether it's communities, to families, to ministers, the benefits of gender equality. There's lots of evidence of this, the economic benefits, the social benefits at all levels. Let's jump down to another couple of different ones. I might just finish actually on the last ones, which are about developing a positive organisational culture and institutional responsibility. This is key. It comes from the top of an organisation, so it's about leadership, promoting and acting as really effective role models for gender equality, and then ensuring that staff have the resources, the capability, the support to deliver gender equality. So it's about building it in, all staff and partners being trained in gender equality and building it into job descriptions, partners' contracts, evaluation mechanisms, and also ensuring that the organisation itself is a positive place for women to work. Evaluating success. Clearly, having disaggregated data is the bedrock. Unless we can measure change, things don't happen. There's a great phrase which, if it matters, measure it. Numbers are important, having targets for women, not only attending courses, being employed at the end of it. This is key. We've all been part of courses or seen them where women have accessed courses and then not got jobs. So numbers are vital, but I'll just I'll invite you to also give equal attention to qualitative aspects. So this could be changes in attitude, changes in systems, changes in facilities for women, childcare, sexual harassment procedures. So thinking really broadly about how we evaluate. And then the last slide, the second to last, is these themes jumped out at me through the conversations with all of you about the need, if we're serious about delivering gender equality, being proactive, being curious, collaboratively working with partners. A skills programme can't do it all themselves, and persistence might be the key one. There is always challenges, there's always some resistance. It's about change, there has to be. And just the last slide, just while we're moving towards the next presentation, is just an invitation for you to consider some of these questions in terms of your work. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much, Yvonne. I'd like to hand over now to Graham Clark from West Lothian College, and he's going to be telling us about a very important gender skills project he was involved with in the construction sector in South Africa. So over to you, Graham. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Good morning and welcome. I'll just briefly introduce myself again. I'm Graham Clark from West Lothian College in Scotland, and I head up construction and automotive engineering at the college. And you'll all probably be aware that it's a very challenging area to get females into, but we've done a lot of work over the years, and from some of the work with our colleagues in South Africa, we've actually managed to improve that figure quite incredibly well. So I'd also like to just at this moment give thanks to the colleagues that I worked with in South Africa, and it's Lasia Ramatima from Ungungundlovu College and Portia Ranawayne from North Cape Urban TVET College, who worked together with us on this project. So next slide, please. I'd like to start off with thinking about, we all think about equality and equity within our programs, within our delivery, within our lives. And it's quite right to give everyone a box to be able to stand on, or quite right to give everyone the right number of boxes in order to be able to see in this case a baseball game. And we focus an awful lot on these sort of fixes, but we sometimes overlook the one obvious factor which is in there. And if you just get the next slide, please, is the barrier. In that case was the fence. So how do we remove the barrier and try and solve some of these challenges that we have? Well, the first step from that is to actually work with people and work with colleagues to actually look at this. Next slide, please. And again, I've worked with colleagues in South Africa, colleagues in my own organisation, and colleagues across Scotland's colleges. And one of the things that came up was perception. It's individuals' perception of what the challenges are, individuals' understandings of where the challenges are, and how we actually fix those. So we actually had a really great discussion across internationally on the different perceptions, because once you understand those, then it's a bit easier to look at how we actually sort of remove some of these barriers. So next slide, please. So one of the things that came up quite a lot was how we actually present ourselves from an educational perspective, how we present our programs, how we actually show what we have on offer. I've used the title there, No More Boys and Girls in Education, and that actually comes from a BBC programme that was shown a few years ago, and it was looking at education, how we treat boys and girls as and we use all the different things that we do now with them, colours, for example, blue for boys and pink for girls, etc. And it kind of highlighted a lot of these challenges, and so that kind of made us look at a lot of our materials, etc., and try and look at the colours, for example, and try and make them a little bit more gender neutral colours. Look at the pictures that we put in our promotional materials and say, well, do we actually promote gender equality here? As I say, the colours and the language we use. And together with that, we do actually become more equitable and actually be able to give a lot more out that's balanced. And it was also looking at the cultural element of it. Working in construction and automotive engineering, for example, many people have come from that industry and it's very biased towards one gender. And it's trying to turn that around and sort of look at how do we actually turn that around and work together on that. When it talks talk about, for example, colours, I mean, one of my colleagues and I, we discussed this an awful lot. And one of my colleagues has just recently returned from maternity leave, and I was reminded that the colour issue starts at birth, because as soon as a boy was born, they put a blue hat on his head. So it's about thinking about these things as we go along. So it does have a big impact if we look at that. So next slide, please. So the first thing we looked at when we actually looked at the challenges, we're looking at our actual staff to say, well, first of all, do they actually create learning materials that are not biased towards one gender? Do they have the skills to be able to do that? Do they have the understanding? So we looked at upskilling staff and training, and I think it was mentioned earlier on about training is so important to make sure that everyone, our colleagues and staff, understand what we're trying to achieve and how we're trying to achieve it, and the fact that we can produce materials and programs and slides and developments in order to ensure we reach that goal. Funding was another issue that came up, not necessarily funding for the colleges to be able to upskill staff, but the funding for returning students, particularly those that come from sort of poorer backgrounds, for example, or who have just returned from maternity leave and are looking to actually come into education to be able to upskill and to move on to different jobs. But funding is a huge issue for many people. So we looked at funding, and that involved a lot of other colleagues across the college to look at those opportunities. And we are able to find funding streams to support many people coming into education. So that was a good barrier crossed very early on. Next slide, please. So I'll give you an example of some of the promotional materials that we use at the college. As you can see, there's a wide range of skill areas there in construction. We've got hairdressing, automotive engineering, and our promotional materials. We'll try and show real, genuine pictures that are balanced between what we actually do offer within our own organisation. And you can see there is a mixed gender within in these opportunities, and that in itself actually starts to generate interest and invite people in to find out a lot more about these areas, because they do start to see that these skilled areas are for them or can be for them as well. The last two will show specific ones: women into STEM and men into childcare. I mean, we do specifically have gender bias on some adverts in order to be able to promote genders into those areas that we know are specifically struggling to do that, and that has actually had a huge impact. I'll give an example of women in STEM. We invited for 2 years now, and I think we've had 12 people in each programme, and all 12 have completed the programme and gone on to university. And I think some of them are still at university, but out of those, about 3 or 4 of them are now actually in employment in that construction area. So these type of programmes and promotional elements do work to actually start building that capacity. Next slide, please. So look at promoting opportunities, and promoting opportunities is about what we do with our promotional materials, but it's also about working with the right people, the important people across the industry and also across the educational element of it, because they all need to be working together. There is absolutely sort of no real point of spending 3 years trying to train someone in construction and the employers are not willing to take on someone because of their gender. So it's about working across those divides and making sure that we have a nice, clear pathway for all our students and for all those that want to move into industry, and a clear pathway between school, college, university and or employment. And that's why we work with employers and have really strong employer engagement, and they actually visit our classes and work with us to develop classes and ensure that we do get the right training in there to support them, but also to support the individuals moving on. Work placements, it's great to be able to get them out there to find out what the work's all about, and again, working with employers is really strong on that. And school engagement, it's going in at the very beginning and actually sowing the seeds very early on that these skilled areas, for example, construction is for everyone. Hairdressing is for everyone. It's about sharing that at a very early age and trying to sort of, bust some of the myths that people have over what they can and cannot do. We've had in college, we deliver every year, we do competition days where we invite schools in, which is mixed gender, to try and introduce them to all the different skilled areas and share that ability to be able to move on. We had, I think, last year and the year before, we've had 5-year-olds in doing construction out in our open area. And when you see a 5-year-old girl with a saw cutting up bits of wood and creating something, it's just absolutely fantastic sight to see. But that's that early stages to build that pathway, and it starts to generate interest. But what we've had to do is try and keep that interest going all the way through from that early stages up until they perhaps decide they want to come to college, particularly for young people, so that's not lost, because we don't want that real interest to be lost. And if you look there on the left hand side, we've got, it's called a WISE bus, and these are colleagues in South Africa, because they've got such a wide area to cover. They actually take all the promotion, all the development and all the gender balanced element out to the community. So they actually take it out there and share it as well, which is really, really, really positive and good. Next slide, please. Okay, it's just to give some examples of how we do widen the opportunities. I mean, who would have ever believed that you'd be using virtual reality or augmented reality or drone surveying in construction and some of this in automotive engineering? It's when you start introducing many of the modern technologies, it does allow everyone to realise that there's more to just being a carpentry and joiner on a site. For example, in construction, there are fantastic opportunities there. There's somewhere around 230 opportunities on a construction site for everyone. And so there's something there for everyone to get into and to be able to join these industries and build up that workforce, because there are some huge opportunities there. So introducing all the new technologies and the emerging technologies to young people in particular, and to those returning to college, actually opens up and widens their interest, and actually gets them on colleges and moves them into employment, which is great. Next slide, please. I just put this one up because one thing is really we think is so important is to get people in to meet those that want to move into industries. I mean, this is a class in South Africa. When I did the project, I didn't have to teach or take a class, but I will never miss an opportunity to take a class. But it was so interesting coming in with a different perspective from a different country to be able to share different opportunities. And that made us realise that to get many people in to share that with young people and with those returning to education is so important, to tell that story from outside and to allow people to realise that there are opportunities there, and employers are prepared to work with everyone to get people into the right job at the right time and in the right place for them. So working across the many outreach areas is very, very important and supportive. So next slide, please. So just that's a brief look at the project, and it was an absolute privilege, and I really thank the British Council for this, because working with the British Council was actually excellent, and with our colleagues in South Africa. It's always been a childhood dream of mine to be going to South Africa, because I've always had a real interest there, particularly. But Nelson Mandela is one of my personal heroes. But I look at one of his writings about, may your choices reflect your hopes and not your fears, and I think it's so true when we're trying to develop our programs, trying to invite people in, trying to encourage a wider range of people into our areas that are struggling to have females, for example, but to widen those opportunities. But they shouldn't be fears, but it's up to us as educators and as employers to offer those choices and to build those choices. It's up to us to allay those fears and to share the opportunities, and it's up to us to provide opportunity for all. And that's been one of our huge drivers, is to be able to do that. And as I say, we'll maybe speak about the figures later, but we have had some really great success in our gender balances within our programs. So just final slide, please, just to finish off. Thank you. Just to finally say, it was, projects do last a short time, and it was a great project for many reasons, from construction, from the gender balance element, from the gender mixes, etc. But although projects last a short time, friendships can last forever. And 2 years after the project's completed, I'm still in contact with colleagues in South Africa. We're still sharing, and we're still developing and building our capacities. So I think just to have a little promotion there for these type of projects, but they really are worthwhile, and they help us all solve our challenges together. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Graham. Thank you. I mean, I think an image in my mind that I'll take away today is this 5-year-old girl with a hammer in her hand. So I'd like to hand over now to Mahbub Rahman from the Sudoku project in Bangladesh, who is going to tell us all about their activities in gender in Bangladesh. Over to you now, Mahbub.
Well, thanks, Linda, and thanks to Yvonne and Graham too for their very informative and rather entertaining presentation. Well, hello from Dhaka, Bangladesh. I'm Mahbub, a member of Sudoko team, and I'm very glad that Sudoko is a part of today's discussion. The other day I was talking about this webinar with my partner, and she said to me, don't try to be charming, too witty, or too intellectual, just be yourself. So I'll be myself today, and so will be my presentation. It will be a little bit different, more on the programmatic side, a bit technical. And I will share what SUDOCO has done to address gender mainstreaming in skills development of Bangladesh, and especially remaining within a very complex context. And why it is complex, we'll discuss this in the next slide. Well, officially, this program is known as Skills and Employment Program in Bangladesh. It was rebranded as SUDOCO. SUDOCO is a Bangla word, which means well-skilled, and refers to a person who has received training, developed skills, and earned reputation for being competent and knowledgeable. And SUDOCO is a 7-year private skills training market development program in Bangladesh. This is where it gets complex, actually. SUDOCO is the first and only skills development program working exclusively with the private sector and following, the market system development approach, while all the other skills development programs are heavily driven by subsidies. And our program is almost at the end of its life cycle. It will end in 21st March 2021. And this program is funded by UKAID and SDC. Director of Technical Education, the Ministry of Education in Bangladesh, is the executing agency of the program. And this program is implemented by Palladium International and with Swiss Contact and British Council. If we move on to the next slide. SUDOCO's objective is to reduce poverty through better training and job opportunities for the poor and marginalized. For this, SUDOCO contributes to a stronger and more inclusive private sector training market. The program tests and scale up market-driven quality skills training system within the ready-made garments and construction sectors. These are the two sectors that we're working with at the moment. The program aims to ensure increased income of at least 65,000 poor and marginalized people by creating access to training for at least 110,000 people, and of which at least 55% are women. If you go to the next slide, you can see the interventions of the program, or what SUDOCO is doing. Currently, we have 3 major components of the program. Firstly, the program supports private training institute with capacity building support, co-invest in tools and equipments, providing CBT packages, facilities implementation, and facilitate implementation of quality standards, facilitate established linkages with the industry, etc. The second component is it also provides technical assistance to garment factories, setting up in-factory training centers for industry-based training initiative. Additionally, it supports the industry skills councils, supports the development of skills training packages, that means the occupational standards of the industry, and supports capacity building of the national training experts to sustain a long-term development process. Now, if you go to the next slide, I mean, if you see the GSI focus of SUDOCO, it's not at all that different from the original goals and objective of the program. The GSI focus is creating a stronger, more inclusive private sector training market and foster greater understanding among private training providers, more women and people of disadvantaged, making sure that there is access for more women and people from disadvantaged groups into jobs and skilled and semi-skilled jobs. And for that, we have adopted and we have evolved through a lot of strategies, and this is a market system development program. So we are constantly learning from the market and constantly evolving ourselves through innovation and changing our plans. So if we go to the next slide, we can shed a bit of light on the strategy of the strategy of a program. So the main, these are a few of the key strategies that we take. Is first of all, integrating GSI by explicit consideration of different needs and experiences of men and women of disadvantaged groups at each stage of SUDOCO, including analysis, design, implementation, and evaluation, is integrated in each and every part of the project. So also, where there are significant disparities for women or a disadvantaged group, implemented targeted intervention are there. For example, relating to women's participation in construction, which is also a barrier in Bangladesh, providing the fact that construction, being a huge sector, still remains very informal. Also, and women's progression beyond machine operator in RMG sector, though the whole, the production floor is dominated by females, but the women's progression beyond that, becoming more than a swing machine operator, is still something to work on. And of course, creating an inclusive and gender-sensitive environment within Shudokko to ensure an equal and respectful working atmosphere. And that is where we started to gender mainstreaming. If you go on to the next slide, I'll just briefly go through our results. It's self-evident. You can see from the numbers where the industry-based training, it's completely the number of female graduates, it's dominated by females. But if you come to the PTPs, the private training providers, the training numbers, the female training numbers are very lower to the actual number of male trainings, because we have construction. We have 14 trades of construction within the PTPs, and it's very difficult to engage women in construction trades or construction related jobs. If you move on to the next slide, and you'll see that this is our technical support to the industry, the RMG industry. We provide technical assistance in developing IBT trainer, industry-based trainer, industry-based assessors, and trained supervisors who can supervise the trained swing machine operators. So you can see the difference in numbers and where it's getting a bit challenging. In terms of IBT trainer, most of them are women, because when you select the trainers for the training of trainers, we select mostly multi-skilled senior operators. Most of them are women. But what we have seen over the last few years is this increasing trend of men participating in the RMG industry, which was earlier completely dominated by women. In terms of IBT assessors, it was also completely dominated by men when we started. These assessors are mainly industrial engineers from the factory. So earlier we didn't have any female assessors in the IBT, but now it has changed. Now we are taking production managers, supervisors, and assessors, and the number of IBT assessors has increased. But the main challenge still remains in supervisor skills, supervisor role. This is still an area that we have to look into, because there are very few supervisors, women supervisors remaining in the industry. So we can see the ratio of men to women in supervisors is actually reflects the whole industry. If you move on to the next slide, there are a few key lessons learned I want to share with you. Like, investment in skills is not only results in increase in monetary gain for women, but also qualitative incomes, such as increased confidence and social status that works as influencing factors in pursuing progression in career. Also, the social barrier for women working in non-traditional occupations such as construction is purely derived from perceptions. In reality, women are working in Bangladesh in construction, but in low-skilled, very low-paid, and very labor-intensive jobs. Shudokko is therefore working with community-based organizations and private training institutions, linking them up to encourage the community to support women getting trained in specific skills of different construction trades. And it has worked over the last few years, over the last year especially. We have seen a 300% hike compared to the overall project period. So it is working in terms of effectiveness. Also embedding, we've also learned that just by embedding GSI considerations in learning materials and in training of instructors in technical and soft skills shows progress in raising GSI awareness for personals. But this is not consistent across the board. I mean, it's not integrated in their because we have found that in the training institute, it's not integrated in the management system. Therefore, Sudokho has introduced quality standards for training institutes, where GSI consideration has been integrated to offer further means of mainstreaming GSI in training system. And Yvonne is the one actually who provided us this guideline and helped us, develop this guideline. Now we move on to the next slide, and I think the main part of my presentation, which is more exciting to me, which keeps me motivated and helps me wake up in the morning and want me to go back to work. These are the stories of our beneficiaries. The first one is Ozufa, and Yvonne was there when we found out about her, and we talked to her together. It's a fascinating story. She used to be a normal housewife. Her husband was a bus driver, but unfortunately her husband had an accident and became invalid for a while, and he couldn't work, and she had to shoulder the responsibility of her family. And fortunately, there was a private training institute, our partner private training institute nearby. She got in touch with them and got trained in plumbing trade from that particular private training institute. It was a really bold move on her part because her community and society in general do not approve of women working in construction in Bangladesh. But she was a very courageous woman. She continued to work and eventually started to earn respectable amount of money. Her minimum income in a month is 30,000 taka per month, and this is in the dry seasons. And to compare, this is an entry-level salary of an executive of a corporate company in Bangladesh. So usually her income varies from 60 to 50 to 60,000. She has also expanded her business. I mean, she's invested in shops. She has invested in more skills training. She's getting skills training in electrician trade, which she thinks will help her to gain more access to job opportunities. We move on to the next slide. This is the story of Milita Tripura. She's a 20-year-old electrician from Bandarban, a hilly region from Bangladesh, a remote region, and she's from ethnic minority community. And she could not continue her studies due to financial constraint. Her aunt was actually a trainer, one of the partner institutes of Sudokho. And she was motivated by her aunt to take this course. And now she's working under subcontractors and earning a respectable sum of money, and she recognizes the tangible benefits of her active participation in the training, which is enabling her to increase her income, diversify her family's nutritional need, and improve the overall health and well-being. And she wants to open up an electrical shop where she can sell electrical equipments and provide her services. If you move on to the next slide. This is Ratna Kisku. She's a Santal woman from Joypurhat, a northern part of Bangladesh. It's also ethnic, but she's also from our ethnic minority community. And her family was going through a very difficult time financially. And at the age of 18, she actually decided to do something about it. And without informing her family, she migrated from her home to Dhaka. And she went through a very difficult time. She had she knew no one in Dhaka. She had no money. And fortunately, she came in touch with one of our training institutes, which are actually on the lookout for this kind of marginalized people who need assistance. And she got enrolled in sewing machine operator trade. And now she's working in an RNG factory as a sewing machine operator. And she's not only helping herself, she's also helping her family and taking care of her family, and it's getting her immense respect and from her family and the community. If you move on to the next slide, we have been talking about our trainees. Now let's just share one story from our trainers who got trained from us. She's Shauna Akhtar. She's a 25-year-old trainer. She's training in one of the RMG factories that we're implementing industry-based training in. And she was selected for becoming a trainer. She considered this a life-changing experience, and it actually helps her, to progress faster before their career. She enjoys training others and appreciates the respect that comes with the position. The role has also brought positive changes to her personal life and in terms of monetary benefit as well as respect in her community and family. I mean, she also feels that now she's a significant part of decision making of the management of the factory, and that this is empowering her. She feels that way. So this is very encouraging for us, and she envisions to become a technician in future. So this is all from me. So thank you all for letting Sudhankar be a part of this discussion, and it's been an absolute privilege. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Madhu. That was fascinating. Before we move to the questions in the Q&A, because we framed the title of the webinar today, skills programming in a post-COVID world, I wondered if I could come to you, Yvonne, and it might not be obvious yet what those implications are, because we're still in the pandemic, but what do you see the challenges being for skills and gender issues going forward?
Linda, yeah. Just before I do address that, maybe just to acknowledge that many of you as part of this event will be affected by this pandemic, so it's a sensitive issue. We also know that evidence shows that more men are at risk of dying from the condition, so that is worth also keeping the forefront of our minds. Looking at other gender issues, we know that the pandemic is deepening existing inequalities, and for women particularly, thinking about the economic impact, it's absolutely compounding those in relation to women who are already earning less in the informal sector, vulnerable jobs, and women who are losing those jobs are facing less social protection. The other factors that we've all touched on actually in our presentations. Unpaid care work has completely come to the fore, that women are having to spend much more time doing that in terms of children and also elderly care, and this is having a huge impact on their availability to engage in, whether it's skills development or work. Also, we know that gender-based violence is increasing exponentially. Women are being forced to be locked down with violent partners, and there's less access to support services. So that is a heady mix and a sobering mix, to be honest, thinking about women's situation at the moment. A couple of thoughts on how we could address it, or just beginning to look forward. We know that, I think UNESCO did research early on that showed 90% of TVET providers had completely closed down. However, lots of providers are also adapting their programs using distance learning types of techniques. Some of these are great. Just in terms of thinking about the gender element of that, we know that such programs rely on access to computers or mobile phones, connectivity, access to digital platforms, and the skills for tutors and trainees, women and men, to access them. So I guess my plea, my hope, my invitation is that a gender lens is applied to coming up with all of the responses to the pandemic, whether they're economic ones or particularly to do with skills development, and the need to particularly use a gender lens, but involve women and women's organisations in thinking through how the responses that we're making, fiscal responses, but also social protection and skills development will impact on women.
Thank you. Maybe Mahbooba could come to you and see, how has the pandemic affected your project, your Sudoku project, and specifically the gender and skills issues.
Well, I mean, first of all, some of the components, the damage is total. Actually, after we are still pandemic is at the peak. At this moment in Bangladesh, so and all the training institutes are closed, so indefinitely. So since the mid-March, all the training institutes have been closed. All the training programs have been suspended, and for at least from March to May, the industry-based training program was also closed. Yeah, because the factories were closed. So this is having, I mean, we were getting in a very good place in our program where we were, we have a numeric target to achieve. That we have done, and we were more focusing on the systemic change that we have to achieve, and that includes, gender mainstreaming, some of the components of the gender mainstreaming as well. All of those activities have been suspended at the moment. And we are more focusing on, we have, in terms of delivery, we are changing our methodology from more physical to an online one. But and also the one thing is, we have the partners with us at the moment, but we are planning to do a sort of vulnerability mapping for our beneficiaries, and provide that knowledge to our partners, like our industry partners or the training institute. So what kind of vulnerability our beneficiaries are facing, and after, in a post-COVID world, during this pandemic and after this pandemic, what kind of vulnerability they will be facing. So we will conduct this study. We'll try to find out what kind of effect or damage this has done. And we'll try to sensitize our partners to that, through that knowledge, we'll try to sensitize our partners. But things are actually still under development, still unfolding. So we're still in the process. So after we cross the threshold, and we can be for certain that, what happens.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Just before I move to Graham, I'd just like to say that we will be making, together with the webinar recording available to you, but also the actual research is on the British Council website. It was also on the link to the invitation for you to join today. And we can also provide copies of this presentation and the case studies as well. So Graham, you sort of very detailed explained your college's approach to gender and skills. Can you tell us a bit more about the sort of positive targets and results that you've had for gender equality and skills within the curriculum at your college? Yeah, sure. We've I've looked after this centre for 6 years now, and when I first moved into the centre, our figures for construction, I think, female were about 1 to 2%, and automotive engineering was probably about 1%, which is quite really low and a bit disappointing. But there's work to be done there, and clearly there has been. Now we're looking at, in construction this year, we had 11%. Female, and in automotive engineering it was 7%. And I don't take credit for that personally. That is a whole team effort and a lot of people working towards that. But there has been a lot of work done in this area to try and improve that, because it's it is about opportunity, and I said in my presentation, it is about making people aware of what is available, and opening up these areas to say, well, construction is not just about carpentry and joinery, and motor vehicles not just about cars.
there's a whole load of things in there that you can enter that industry with, and that's what we've found. And through putting on specific programs for women in STEM, and the Men into Care, for example, has actually supported a lot. So it's a lot of the work that's been done is starting to reap really great sort of figures now, and we're really pleased. We set the targets every year and we challenge ourselves every year, and every year since we've done that we've managed to exceed our own targets. So I'm really delighted with that.
Thanks, Graham. We've just got time for we've got 1 minute left, one last question. I'll maybe give this to Yvonne. And it was a question from the Q&A. Can these tools be purposed for other programmes? Are they developed specifically for skills programmes? So I think someone's looking to use them already.
A great question, and I omitted to say it, so thank you, whoever reminded me. Actually, the first tool particularly is based on, it's developing an existing tool, a British Council tool, the gender analysis one. And yeah, without a doubt, each of the tools, the way that I've framed them and the guiding questions can very easily be adapted to any sort of other programmes. And as I also mentioned in the examples, hopefully it came across that some of those programmes that blended both social aspects with skills and economic aspects were the most successful actually in engaging and getting women into work. So yeah, surely.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, and a huge thank you from British Council to our very esteemed panel today. It was great having you with us, and I'm sure our participants will have learned quite a lot from the session today. So thank you very much, and goodbye everyone. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.